Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices for the Mausoleum. In today's episode, we are going to read 2 holiday-themed horror stories. I came very festive with my Krampus shirt and my Krampus earrings. I'm obsessed. Anyway, so I'm gonna read a story from Creepypasta, and then I'm gonna jump into a story from Hunger for Death by Joshua Marcella. I asked ahead of time if I was allowed to read it because it's a new book and I didn't want to ruin anything for anybody, but it was one that was already published, so they gave me permission to do it. So I'm going to jump into the Creepypasta one first, and then we'll get into Josh's book. So this one is a Creepypasta, and I'll link everything. I'll link the story I'm about to read from the Creepypasta. I'll post the article for the other one that I'm going to read, and then I'll post a link to where you can buy a copy of Hunger for Death for yourself by Joshua Marcella. All right, so this first one is a creepypasta called A Christmas Warning. I don't hide the fact that I hate Christmas. Call me a proverbial Scrooge, insult me to no end, but every year I feel a dread greater than anyone who hates the holiday season could ever claim. If you know me personally, you'd assume it's because of my younger brother's disappearance, and you'd be right for the most part. It happened one Christmas morning when, by all rights, the 2 of us should have been sitting by our tree, opening presents and making treasured childhood memories. Instead, I was treated with a day of police frantically searching our house and neighborhood while questioning my distraught parents. They questioned me too, of course, but as a 10-year-old girl, I didn't have much to say. I told them that he and I had gone to bed, excited for what the next day had in store for us, and that was the last I saw of him. He just never came down to open his gifts, and that's when my mother discovered that his room was empty. But that was a lie. I do know what happened to Chris. I know who took him away, and I know that if I told the truth, no one would believe me then or now. Santa kidnapped my brother. Please don't laugh. I know how it sounds, and you're right, it sounds ridiculous. He can't be real, and even if he was, he's supposed to be nice to children. But I know what I saw. And it wasn't some lunatic in a Santa suit either. That man was as real as a winter wind that chills you down to the bone. I suppose I could start by telling you how this all started. Before the holiday was ruined for my family, that Christmas Eve we all left out cookies for Santa, talked about what we hoped he would bring, and then our parents read the night before Christmas to my brother and I, all of them cheerful, mundane traditions for our family. What was different that final year was I was noticeably less enthusiastic about the whole process. It was the first year I had openly stopped believing in Santa Claus. I was a strange and cynical child, much to the concern of my parents. To tell you the truth, until that fateful night, I had never really been a believer in Santa Claus anyway. I mostly just played along to please adults, but that year I was tired of all the acting. That's one of the many ways we differed so much, my brother and I. You see, Chris was young, energetic, and a curious boy. I remember the year he was taken was also the one where he had found where our parents were hiding our unwrapped gifts weeks ahead of time. He refused to tell his own big sister what she was going to be getting, though. Figures, I guess. Most importantly, however, being 3 years younger than me, he was still very much a believer. My flat denials of the existence of Santa Claus only served as a challenge to him, and he was determined to prove otherwise. We were heading up the stairs to bed when he got my attention. Stay up with me, he said as he tugged at my pajama sleeve. I'll show you he's real. We'll catch him in the act. I bet we'll be the first ones to have ever done it, and I'm sure he'll give us all kinds of stuff when we do. I sighed. I'd rather just get some sleep, Chris, I told him. You can go on believing if you want, but I don't have to just have a good Christmas. I always tried to avoid being such a damper on his spirit, and I thought convincing him to forget his harebrained schemes would be better than waiting up half the night just to see his disappointment. Oh, come on, Sis, he cried. Do I always have to make you have fun? If it weren't for me, you'd turn into a boring old lady just like Mrs. Henderson. I must have made a disgusted face because Chris laughed, gave a mischievous grin, and said, Well, what's it going to be, Mrs. Henderson? Are you going to catch Santa in the act or not? Miss Henderson was my 4th grade teacher, and I despised the old crone with a passion. Chris knew how to push my buttons. All right, short stuff, you're on, I said with more bravado than I actually had. First to fall asleep has to wait till New Year's to open their gifts from Santa. Chris's eyes flashed with excitement at the wager. I'll take that bet. So we went to our rooms to wait for our parents' turn to go to bed. After the lights downstairs went out, I waited about a half hour just to make sure they were asleep, and I crept out of my bed and sneaked my way downstairs. I saw there was a light on in the living room. Chris was sitting casually near the fireplace. "What took you so long?" he asked, always the confident one. "I waited for Mom and Dad to go to sleep, idiot," I replied. "They're not going to be happy if they find us here." With an unceremonious plop, I sat down on the couch directly in front of the fireplace. "So how do you expect to stay up the entire night?" I asked. "I imagine I'll figure it out," Chris said. I'm not sure how long we waited there for the so-called St. Nick to appear, but Chris looked almost ready to doze off when we were shocked awake by something that must have been large and heavy hitting the roof. After a short pause, there was a sound of shuffling and the scraping of feet. I was sure I heard the ringing of little bells. "Oh, man," Chris whispered in awe. "It's really him." For a moment, I wondered why Mom and Dad weren't awoken by any of this. All this racket was enough to wake the dead. But that train of thought stopped when chimney soot started sprinkling down into the fireplace. Chris dashed over to me and shook my shoulders. "What did I tell you? He's real. He's real." Unlike Chris, I didn't think there was any supernatural explanation behind the strange occurrence. I was convinced it was a burglar finding their way in through unconventional means. I sat stiffly staring at the fireplace for a few moments, unsure of what to do, until I rose and dived underneath the couch to hide. "What are you doing?" Chris cried in bewilderment. "He's coming." "Get down," I whispered fiercely at him. "We don't know who that really is." Chris opened his mouth to protest, but a voice let out a grunt from the chimney, and it spooked him enough to find a spot of his own. He hid behind Dad's large leather lounge chair in the corner. A few minutes later, a final loud thump came, and the front of our fireplace was obscured by all the soot rushing out into the air. I covered my mouth and nose, trying desperately to prevent myself from coughing. When it finally settled, the sight gave my cynical mind a serious shock. That old man that stood before me really was someone dressed as Santa Claus, and he looked every inch the part. His body was the perfect size, he had the long white beard, and his outfit was beautifully made red jacket with pants. His face contained the soft, loving features of an old man enjoying the moment. What surprised me the most about the strange man was, even though he just entered through our musty chimney, there wasn't a single speck of soot on him. It was almost as if anything that could mar his perfect appearance was naturally repelled. I was finally convinced he was the real deal by what came next. Throwing his sack of presents over his shoulder, Santa stepped away from the fireplace, and a short elf girl emerged to follow him. The elf had pointed ears, a glistening green suit, and was so short she only came up to Santa's knee. Unlike the jolly old man, she seemed terrified to take a single step into our home. She looked all around as if there was some terrible threat in the room, and seemed only slightly relieved when she mistakenly thought it was empty. Santa noticed her fear, but rather than reassure her as would be expected, for a fraction of a second his kind face changed into a look of pure, horrifying malice. It was like the kind old man had been replaced by an insane, merciless master, only to return a nanosecond later. The elf's mood changed on a dime. In a short order, she was filling our stockings with small toys and candy, with a small smile plastered onto her face that seemed ready to crack at any moment. Being so short, she had to use some kind of magic to levitate so she could get within reach. With purposeful yet quiet footsteps, Santa made his way to our tree. Taking 2 presents from his bag, he placed them in the proper spot and went to where we had left his traditional snack. The elf was done with her job too, but Santa wasn't inclined to share with his companion. Now that she was towing the line, he barely even acknowledged her presence. She just stood there next to him, waiting for him to finish, wringing her hands in nervous movements. On its face, the whole scene like something ripped straight from a Christmas television special. But even at my young age, I could tell that something more was going on. What I'm trying to say is it seemed they were attempting to appear whimsical for whimsy's sake. Like it was all one big act they were putting on. The little elf barely passed as a convincing actress, and Santa's momentary lapse only cemented my suspicions. It was something I was unable to articulate fully at the time, but I can now. It looked like a ruse. Chris fell for it right away, though. He must have been too young to notice the sinister signs that I had been able to pick up on. From my ankle on the floor, I could see him clearly in his own hiding spot. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was completely enamored with these 2 people. To my horror, he slowly crept out from behind the chair. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him to stay right where he was, that these 2 were strangers, that there was no way to tell what would happen once they knew we were there. But that would have given us both away. It's not like he wouldn't have listened to me or would have listened to me either. How many kids out there can't help but trust Santa Claus? Wow, he whispered to our bizarre intruders. It's really you. At this, both Santa and his elf turned to find Chris standing in the middle of the room. Both had this faux expression of surprise that only served to unsettle me further. Waiting up for us, I see, Santa commented with a warm smile. Yeah, Chris said cheerfully. I wanted to prove that you were really real in everything. And it seems you have, Santa replied with a chuckle. He sat down in my father's chair and motioned for Chris to sit with him, to which he obliged. Oh man, I've got so many questions, Chris exclaimed. Are the reindeer on the roof? Can I see them? What's it like living in the North Pole? Oh, I wish I could see it someday. All in good time, Santa said, grinning at his remark. Maybe to some it would have looked like a friendly expression, but to me it was a smile that seemed to contain the self-satisfaction of winning a game. As for the elf, she had lost all color in her face. She made no move whatsoever as the two sat together, but her expression was enough to tell me that something horrible was about to happen. I knew you were real. I just knew it, Chris said, and all the big kids at school give us such a hard time about it. Even Sis was losing it too. Just wait until everyone hears about this. They won't, Chris, said Santa, clasping his gloved hand on my brother's shoulder. Huh? Why not? He asked, confused. Do I have to keep it a secret? Santa laughed, a deep, evil laugh that was too much unlike his fabled ho, ho, ho. Do you honestly think that you've been the only one to ever see me? That throughout history the many little children of the world haven't done the same as you? Chris shifted uncomfortably in the man's lap. I guess not. You see, Chris, Santa began, children are not to be trusted. They're the ignorant, greedy, and selfish offspring of humans, a greedy and selfish race to begin with. Over the years, I've been able to sustain myself on these human qualities, and humans have happily whitewashed my persona in order to satiate their desires without guilt. It's the perfect season for it. Don't you agree, my dear boy? The excitement on Chris's face was all but gone now. He was finally starting to get it. The children who seek me out always want something, Santa said. More meaningless possessions, satisfaction of curiosity, or simple proof are only a few examples. However, there is always a price to be paid for breaking the rules and finding something that is not meant to be found. Throughout this conversation, the elf began to gather the gifts they had brought with a hint of reluctance. She even managed to make the cookie Santa ate magically reappear. She was ridding the house of any evidence of their presence. Santa's hand squeezed Chris's shoulder tightly. I'm always looking for more helpers, he continued. Children who have seen me, who could never keep such a secret, are the perfect candidates. My brother's face turned to an expression of absolute fear. He now realized his fatal error. You are not the first, he said. You certainly won't be the last. Turning to his elf, Santa barked out a command. Annabelle, it's time. Change him now. No, please, the elf stammered. Please don't make me. Santa gave her a cruel look of disdain and waved his hand towards her in an odd way. I was horrified to see the elf suddenly start clawing frantically at her face, digging her nails into her own skin. She screeched in pain, unable to stop harming herself. Santa waved his hand again, releasing her from her torture. Her face was now covered in scratches and dripping with blood. Chris screamed and dove off Santa's lap, trying to rush out of the room, but the old man made another strange wave with his hand, and Chris stopped in his tracks. As if possessed, my brother turned around to face him, his eyes wide with fear. He was under that awful man's control. Don't you see? It's too late for you now, he said triumphantly. Accept your fate. With a smug grin, Santa looked at his companion. I should really start having you all wear red, he said in a mocking tone. At least then the blood wouldn't show so much. Are you going to do as you're told, Annabelle? Or do I have to think of something worse for you? The elf let out a heavy sob and looked up to my terrified brother. I'm sorry, she said in a sad, high-pitched voice. From where I was, I could see her tears mingling with blood as she took a little silver wand hidden in the folds of her clothes. She pointed it directly at my brother, and a blinding flash filled the room. It took some time for my sight to recover, but when it did, I saw the Chris I knew disappearing from before me. His whole body looked like it was melting before my eyes, unnecessary flesh falling away and reshaping itself. When the transformation was over, he was shorter and squatter. His ears came out to sharp points, his nose was round and flush as if he had been out in the cold. Even his clothes had changed to a uniform similar to Santa's companion, only red this time. His new elf appearance was a caricature of his former self. He must have been so scared. Looking down at his new form, he could only let out a pitiful squeak. So was I, as I lay frozen underneath the couch, clutching the carpet. As that awful obese man and strange crying elf dragged my newly turned brother into our fireplace, Chris looked down and stared directly at me, his expression a desperate cry for help. But what could I do? How could I fight off two magical beings without getting myself into the same horrible situation? So I did nothing. I still have nightmares about that. With Chris in tow, they shot up the chimney, all together through their strange magic, and that was the last I ever saw of my little brother. For almost the entire night, I stayed under the couch, softly crying. In my state of shock, I had no strength to do much else, but as I saw the sun slowly rise from the windows, I knew it was safe to crawl out of my hiding place and find my way back to my room. The rest, I guess, is history. To this day, I won't have anything to do with this terrible holiday. I don't decorate, I don't give out gifts, I don't go to parties. I won't even live in a house with a chimney or a fireplace. Hell, I even refuse to visit houses with one this time of year. Don't even get me started about the mall or the street corner Santas. I just keep to my apartment as much as I can. In my paranoia, I really just turn into a cheerless shut-in a month out of the year because I know that somewhere in the world there will be more unlucky children going missing. I still don't know why I didn't meet the same fate as my brother. Has he never told his captors that I was there too? Could he really have kept that secret for that long? Could they somehow pry the truth out of him? Every year since that night, I've been terrified that they'll finally come for me. Perhaps what keeps me safe is the fact that I've stayed quiet all these years, never telling anyone what really happened. I can only assume that Chris has done the same. Anyone out there must be wondering why I'd say nothing about it until now. To be honest, I want to because I'm not sure what that fat bastard could do to me. I mean, there's no way he could turn a fully grown adult into an elf, right? But most of all, I want to know what's become of Chris. It hurts to think what could have happened to him over all these years, and I need to find out. Maybe if I share my story with the world, somebody out there will give me some answers. Maybe there's some way I could help him. I'm willing to take the risk. I just hope all the disturbing possibilities I've imagined won't come to pass. Christmas Eve is coming. Wish me luck. Credited to Stephanie Selby, Selvy. That was cute. That's not creepypasta. I like that one. I like it. Okay. Yeah, so that takes us into one of the stories from Hunger for Death by Joshua Marcello. I was fortunate enough I got an early reading of it. So this is actually the first time I'm reading from my book, my physical copy. Okay, so this one is called A Trailer Park Christmas. Sounds dreamy, right? Like every other Christmas Eve, Carl sat alone in his mobile home. December was a festive time in the trailer park, but this year, Carl's lot looked abandoned. His was the only trailer without colorful lights hanging from the roof. No holly jolly wreath adorned his screen door. The corner of his living room did not have the customary tree decorated with glass bulbs, tinsel, or lights. Not a single holiday card was displayed on his refrigerator or anywhere else, for that matter. The only evidence of the holiday season was the Santa hats worn by the polar bears printed on the cans of Coke he was mixing with his whiskey. Don't get it confused. Carl was no Ebenezer Scrooge by any means. He used to love the holiday season. In the years prior, he would have been the first to decorate his home. It had been a tradition since he was a young boy to put up the decorations the week after Thanksgiving, no matter how much it annoyed his parents. Now, he did all he could to avoid any reminders of Christmas, which was no easy task. This Christmas Eve, he had passed out drunk in his faux leather recliner, watching MASH, wearing only his torn work pants and a stained tank top. As the hour approached midnight, the cable network switched to It's a Wonderful Life, to the sound of Carl's sawmill snoring. Had he been awake, he would have immediately changed the channel. Even on Christmas, he had no interest in watching Caper's classic film. As George Bailey contemplated suicide on the 12-inch television screen, a heavy thump sounded on the metallic roof above. This was soon followed by tapping noises, muffled by the snow that had accumulated there. It wasn't a tapping like somebody lightly banging a hammer, nor did it sound like the prancing of 8 tiny reindeer that one might expect given the occasion. It sounded more like the pitter-patter of little feet, several sets of little feet to be exact. Carl, oblivious in his drunken slumber, had a syrupy bead of spittle hanging from his drooping bottom lip. His smudged glasses rested in the patch of chest hair sprouting from beneath his tank top. They were attached to a strap around his neck so he wouldn't lose them. Outside, the thumping of small boots landing in the snow could be heard from the porch situated beside the trailer. On the television, a 12-year-old George Bailey is rescuing his brother Harry from drowning in the frozen pond when somebody knocked hard on Carl's loosely hung screen door. Carl snapped awake. What the? His blurred eyes darted confusedly around the dimly lit room, unsure what had woken him up. He rubbed his eyes, then clumsily placed his glasses onto the bridge of his nose. As he became more fully awake, he reached over to the stack of milk crates he used as an end table and grabbed his drink. Taking a swig to wet his whistle, he heard another knock on the front door. Carl was so startled at the sudden pounding that he spilled his drink into his lap. Shit! God damn it! Who the hell is knocking at this hour? He barked as he peered up at the clock on the wall. 5 past midnight. Christ, that better be a beautiful young hooker. Carl leaned forward in the recliner and set down his drink. Standing up, he noticed the television was no longer playing his favorite show, but a Christmas movie instead. Blech. He grabbed the remote control that was jammed into the side of the recliner cushion and quickly changed the channel. He was oblivious to the pair of glowing green eyes peering in at him through the window, nor the tiny fingers clawing at the screen, eager to get inside. The knock on the door came again, but this time it was more assertive. Jesus, hold your horses, he called, then added under his breath, probably those damn kids from next door. The floor settled under his weight as he walked to the door. His head spun wildly from the booze. The rundown trailer was a sufficient living space for himself, but he never meant for it to become his permanent home. Last month, he had been in talks with the bank about using his Christmas bonus for a down payment on a 2-bedroom ranch the next town over. He was also up for a considerable promotion. Unfortunately, this fell through following the company's owner's death, along with his wife and 2 children. They were killed in a hit and run after leaving the annual company Christmas party the last week of November. All the workers in the plant had been laid off. Over 100+ people left jobless just weeks before Christmas. Carl was devastated. So here he remained in the West Burnchester trailer park, a jobless alcoholic with no family. His minuscule military pension helped pay the bills and stock up his liquor cabinet, but it wasn't enough to get him into a new home. He sluggishly made it to the door and flipped on the porch light. Snow was steadily falling. The hexagonal window in the door gave off the illusion that he was flying through space. He stood on his tippy toes and peered outside to get a glimpse of the intruder, but saw no one. Who's there? Do you know what time it is? He said. No response came. Carl opened the door and swung it open, expecting to see some nosy kids waiting with snowballs, but no one was there. In the snow, he could see several small boot prints heading in all directions. Someone had torn the screen down the middle. He noticed small, greasy handprints had been pressed against the glass on the bottom half of the screen door. A cold draft of snow pushed its way through the torn screen, sending a chill down Carl's flesh. Shivering, he folded his arms over his chest. Son of a bitch. Who the hell is out there? He called out. You show yourselves right now, you little pricks. I don't play games. Poking his head through the door, he looked in all directions to see if he could spot anyone hiding in the shadows. Carl heard what sounded like high-pitched laughter of children mixing with the whistle of the wind. I know you're out there. Shouldn't you be in bed waiting for Santa Claus, you little punks? Where are your parents? Still, no response came. He supposed the noise could have just been the wind blowing through the trees or the loose siding on the trailer, but something wasn't sitting right with him. Carl looked quizzically one more time at the small handprints, then slammed the door behind him. I'll be sure to call the landlord this morning, Christmas or no Christmas. Carl's words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass coming from the back of the trailer. A brisk wind howled through the broken window, bringing with it a gust of snow. Are you fucking kidding me? He sounded infuriated. But the truth was, Carl was beginning to feel a little nervous. He wanted to believe it was kids just playing a prank on him, but it was getting out of hand. After storming through the living room, he entered the kitchen. He eyed the 8-inch kitchen knife that rested by the sink and considered grabbing it. It's just kids, Carl. Don't be foolish. His thought was interrupted when he jammed his bad knee into a wooden chair beside the table. A surge of pain shot through his nervous system and sent him stumbling into the entrance of the hallway, hitting the wall hard with his shoulder. Carl lost his breath and had to take a second to regain his composure. A sudden jingling sound caught his attention. He peered down the hallway in time to see something small dart by in the darkness. Were those bells? He thought, as he was now sure it was kids playing a Christmas prank on him. Too bad for them. He wasn't the playful type. Hey, kid, you better get the hell out of my trailer before I count to 10, he said, wincing in pain as he put his weight on his injured leg. He placed a hand on the wallpapered paneling. Through gritted teeth, the countdown began. 1, 2, 3. He started limping his way down the dark hallway. You little shit, better hope I don't get to 10. He hobbled up to the first bedroom, mainly used for storage, and reached past the door frame to turn on the light. Nothing happened. Then he remembered he'd forgotten to change the blown bulb. Perfect, he thought. Then continued the countdown to Judgment Day. 4, 5, 6. His tone grew harsher with every number as the pain in his leg increased. I'm warning you, I have a constitutionally protected right to defend my property. He approached the door to the bathroom. His anger shifted to unease. If this wasn't just some neighborhood kids playing a prank, what on earth could it be? The wind continued to blow snow in through the broken back door window, which was forming a small snowdrift in the hallway. The frigid air sent another shiver down Carl's arms. It's going to cost me a fortune to fix that, sons of bitches, he thought. A shimmer caught his attention on the broken. Thin strands of tinsel had caught on the broken shards of glass. The hell? Flipping on the light to the bathroom, he was greeted by the bright glow of the halogen. He looked around. Nothing looked out of place. The shower curtain around the tub was pulled back, leaving nowhere for a kid to hide in the tiny room. He turned towards the back room, his bedroom, and continued the countdown. 7, 8. You are cutting it close. Last chance. From the living room, he could hear an infomercial for a holiday CD playing samples of old Christmas tunes by generic pop artists. Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Carl looked toward the living room and let out an angry snarl. I got your delightful right here, he said, grabbing his crotch. Turning back to his bedroom, he pushed open the door a little bit. An unpleasant, high-pitched giggle, the sound of a child who also happened to be a heavy smoker, came from somewhere within the bedroom. He had them cornered. They had nowhere to go. 9, you're fucked. You had your chance. He reached in and turned on the light. 10, now you're mine. Elbowing the door, it swung open the rest of the way and slammed against his bed frame. His hand was still resting on the light switch. Over his bed, he saw words crudely carved into the paneling. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to the naughty. What the fuck? Come out now. His words were cut off by a searing surge of pain as the bones on his right hand were crushed by a blunt force. Carl let out a scream of agony as he pulled his hand back to look at it. Gripping his wrist below the wound, he saw it wasn't crushed, but something had pierced the center of his hand. Whatever it was, it had left a hole 2 inches diameter straight through his hand. He could see the floor through the gore and pieces of broken bone protruding from the hole. The pain was unbearable. He looked down to see his attacker and wished he hadn't. A short figure draped in a dark green hooded robe stood knee-high about 2 feet away from Carl. It was about the size of a child, but the facial features and wrinkled hands said otherwise. It pulled back the hood and rested on its shoulders. Carl watched in horror as the thing licked the blood off the pointed end of the large candy cane it had used to puncture his hand. Its tongue slipped out between red, cracked lips that were enwreathed by a long graying beard. Carl noticed it had pointed ears, except one of them looked as though something had bitten half of it off. Dangling from the earlobes were earrings, strands of hair threaded through dangling human eyeballs. Carl was in shock and disbelief at what stood before him, but the immense pain in his hand reassured him that it was all very real. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped as another small hooded creature rose from behind his bed. It held out defensively, a set of sharpened reindeer antlers, while it growled at Carl from the other side of the bed. This one looked more corroded, with pale green skin. Around its neck it wore a necklace adorned with severed ears. The nose was a plump purple thing, covered in reddish spider veins. The rest of the attire matched that of its comrade. Carl could hear someone on the television was singing, "Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow." "What is this? You some sort of demented gang? Look at my fucking hand." Carl tried to sound angry, but fear was creeping into his voice. Speaking louder, he said, "Is this a robbery? Well, I don't have shit to steal, you jackasses. Look at me. I'm broke as a joke." His words trembled as his pain in his hand shot up, making him weak in the knees. The wicked pair just watched the man in the tank top stand there, blood running down his arm and onto the floor while he desperately pleaded for answers. They shot each other crooked smiles, flashing their jagged, rotten teeth, as if they relished his pain and suffering. The first one took another lick of the grotesque candy cane, savoring the taste of Carl's blood. The second one licked its lips, enticed by the pooling blood. Carl's rage left him. Now he looked scared and despondent. There was no way he'd be able to outrun them with his injured knee. His life was miserable and hopeless, but he didn't want to die. Not like this. "What do you want?" he screamed. "Do you want me to beg? Is that what you want?" The intruder took another lick, unbothered by the pathetic sight Carl presented. Carl gave in. Using his good hand, he leaned against the door frame and slowly lowered himself onto his aching knee. The pair approached him with menacing expressions, clearly not here to grant clemency. Carl's eyes welled up as he began to plead for mercy. "Please, I beg you, don't kill me. I want to live." This triggered no emotional response from the two angering Carl. "Please, for God's sake, it's Christmas." His cries were cut short when a small, rough hand gripped his sweaty forehead and yanked his head backward. He felt the pressure on his calf muscles as little boots stepped up onto his legs. A second hand swung around the other side and began to shove something into Carl's gaping mouth. Carl looked across the room at the standing mirror against the wall and caught a brief glimpse of what he was choking on, small black cubes of coal. The taste was awful. He sucked in bits of dust, and loose pieces broke off as he desperately gasped for breath. "Please make it quick. Just let it be over with," Carl thought, hoping God would be listening. Some part of him worried it was far from over. The two intruders joined their accomplice. Bells jingled with each footfall. Tears escaped from Carl's bloodshot eyes as a snippet of Silent Night played on the television. It reminded him of when his grandparents would bring him to church on Christmas Eve. He always loved the hymns. Carl nearly forgot about the pain until the third intruder clobbered him at the base of his skull. Pain flared for a moment, then the world around Carl went dark. Carl woke to find himself driving his car down a snowy road. This was a dream. No, a nightmare. The telephone poles were decorated with Christmas wreaths, and the trees were glistening with beautiful white lights through the freshly fallen snow. His head was heavy with drunkenness from the numerous drinks he'd had that night to celebrate his promotion. He knew he shouldn't be driving, but didn't have any friends to stop him. He tapped his hands on the steering wheel to the beat of an old-time Christmas song he'd always loved. As he approached a red light, his attention was pulled away by a Christmas display that decorated the front lawn of a beautiful two-story home. "I'll own a house like that soon enough. It's what I deserve," he boasted to himself. The lights made him feel nostalgic, and he got lost in the past. He remembered visiting his grandparents at Christmas time and the warm feeling of sitting by the fire in front of the tree. Carl blew through the red light, and reality came crashing when he clipped the rear end of a passing car, sending the other car into a tailspin, its tires skating over the icy road, out of control. Carl slammed on his brakes and managed to skid to a stop and avoid slamming into a telephone pole. His head was spinning crazily as he rolled down his window to see what he'd hit. There was nothing in sight. He rubbed his eyes, unbuckled his belt, and stepped out into the snow. Once out of the car, a jolt of pain shot up from his right knee. He was so intoxicated he hadn't felt it jammed to the underside of the dashboard. Limping, he returned to the point of collision and noticed a second pair of tires. He followed them with his eyes until he spotted a gap in the guardrail. He made his way over and peered down into the deep gully below. What looked like a car had flipped onto its roof after smashing into several trees on the way down. From what he could see, nobody had crawled from the overturned vehicle. The falling snow softly landed on the exposed undercarriage of the car, melting as it touched the hot piping of the exhaust. Carl was overcome with guilt. He fought the urge to vomit as he looked down at the car he'd driven off the road, and the people he possibly killed. His entire future flashed before his eyes. In an instant, he knew what he had to do. He glanced around at the roads and nearby homes and saw no witnesses. Run, a voice in his mind told him. Get out of here. Carl stumbled back to his car, trying to ignore the pain in his knee, and drove home as carefully as he could. He hoped to make a clean escape and put this all behind him. For a while, he thought he'd done just that, since the police never called him in for questioning. He opened his eyes. It had been just a dream. He lay there for a moment in a state of confusion. He was in pain and he was cold, and it helped to clear his thoughts. He was laying in the snow, staring up at the night sky. Snow was still falling. His jaw ached as he gagged, and he tried to take a breath. He lifted his hand to feel what was crammed into his mouth, and his palm erupted with pain. It all came back to him. He had been home. It was Christmas morning. Someone had broken into his house. There were three intruders, he recollected, slipping into a state of panic. Little demonic things. The intruder holding the antlers kicked wet snow into Carl's face, and he shot up into a sitting position. Merry Christmas, murderer, a deep voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness. Puffs of breath escaped the darkness from whoever was speaking. One of the intruders hawked a loogie into Carl's face. The thick wad of snot ran down his bristly cheek, but he didn't dare wipe it off. Carl could not speak. His mouth was full of cold. He struggled to breathe through his nose as he painstakingly followed the order. I'm not a murderer, he thought, now on the verge of tears. I'm not a murderer. It was just a bad dream. He noticed all three intruders standing in front of him, the snow up to their thighs. I said, get on your knees, the voice demanded. Carl squinted, but could not see who was there. Fighting through the pain, he did as he was told, afraid of the repercussions if he disobeyed. Finally, on his knees, he settled into the snow. Two of the intruders turned to face each other and bowed their heads. A looming figure, at least a foot or two taller than Carl, stepped from the darkness and into the light of the street lamp. As wide as a refrigerator, it wore a black hooded cloak trimmed with what appeared to be human. The snow seemed to avoid the figure, blowing around but never settling on its large frame. It was as if its body was emanating an intense amount of heat. Thick steam rose off the cloak before dissipating into the air. Carl noticed as the figure took heavy steps forward that the snow around its boots sizzled and melted into a black puddle, staining snow around it. Carl couldn't see it clearly, but the figure was dragging a heavy wooden object. It stopped a few feet in front of Carl and paused. Tears streamed from Carl's eyes. Whatever he had done to deserve this meeting, he was now sorrier than ever. With its free hand, the figure pushed back the heavy hood, revealing a man's face. He was practically bald. A fringe of black hair encircled his bare scalp and flowed down over his impossibly broad shoulders, and he sported a thick, bushy black beard. The man belted out a mock laugh, sounding like a lewd Santa Claus. You've been naughty, Carl. Very, very naughty. Carl knelt in terrified awe, unable to speak a word. The man spoke as if he was a father scolding his child, his voice reverberating into the night like distant thunder. You are one of the wretched few who was naughty enough to make my list, he explained, patting at his breast. The minions all hissed the word naughty at the mention of the list. Do you know who stands before you? He asked. No, and Carl couldn't answer. Carl violently shook his head. All you gluttonous, greedy humans know of jolly old St. Nick, my dollar store whore of a brother. The three minions chuckled. All because you believe he brings you presents and candy and all those material things you ask for. Garbage is what I call it. Spitting into the snow, it sizzled as it made contact. Nobody knows of his younger sibling. That is until, as in your case, it is too late. Carl Scottsdale, you are in the presence of Dominicus Klaus, the bringer of Christmas judgment. I have not brought you presents on this Christmas morning, no candy, no. I have come to take something from you, something that is rightfully mine. Dominicus's face lit up with a smile so wide his jagged stained teeth were visible. Your meaningless life. Carl's eyes grew wide as the tightness balled up in his chest. They, Dominicus waved a hand toward the minions, are my most loyal servants. There are many of them, but tonight there are three. Think of them as the three wise men, if it brings you comfort. Dominicus continued his monologue. They were once sent as elves, slaving away in his sweatshops for hours on end. making toys for all the little boys and girls who didn't do anything to deserve them. That is, until my brother cast them out for having the balls to question his authority. You see, my brother is a bit of an authoritarian. Control over others is what truly brings him joy, what truly makes him jolly. He thrives on the fact that he alone gets to pick which kids get presents and which get nothing. Dominicus growled the last word. One of the elves let out a gravely hiss through his gritted teeth and bounced his sharpened candy cane into his open palm. Now they humbly serve the one and only Anti-Christmas. The yin to Santa's yang. Serving up the naughtiest of naughties on a platter to their beloved, yours truly. The elves chanted, naughty, naughty, in a taunting schoolyard fashion. But enough of this, Dominicus roared, sounding indignant. The elves stopped their chants. Now that I have enlightened you as to who we are, sentencing shall commence. Carl mistakenly gulped, swallowing more bits of coal, and winced in pain. Dominicus moved a step closer. Steam rose from the snow around his large boot. Reaching into his robe, he pulled out a large scroll, unrolled it, and began to read the text. You, Carl E. Scottsdale, are responsible for the untimely death of the Bartlett family. A loving mother, a supportive father, and 2 innocent children. All of them died because you had one too many drinks. You drove them off the road. You ran home like a dog with its tail between its legs. You didn't even check to see if they were alive. Didn't look in the rearview mirror. Didn't even call for help. His judgmental voice now echoed like they were inside a cathedral. The 3 elves growled as they slowly backed away from Carl, preparing for the oncoming judgment. Suddenly, it all became clear to Carl what this was all about, what the dream was about. It was no dream. He had killed his boss and his family. He was responsible for all his friends losing their jobs. Carl was overwhelmed by long overdue remorse, knowing that, as impossible as it seemed, this was all really happening. It was time to meet his maker, and he deserved no mercy. Time as he knew it slowed. All around him there was nothing but silence. Dominicus Klaus, bringer of Christmas judgment, lifted the wooden object he held in his huge hand. Carl tried to gasp as he saw the head of the mallet rise up out of the snow. Chunks of coal were wedged deep down his esophagus, and he choked. It all made sense. It wasn't just a mallet. It was an enormous gavel. On the rounded end of the gavel, he could make out stains of dry blood mixed with chunks of flesh and broken bits of bone. Time sped back up in time for Carl to hear Dominicus bellow out as he lifted the gavel high over his head. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to the naughty. Peace be to the dead, judgment to the sinner. Carl took his last breath and closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he thought, with self-pity. Sorry for those he'd unintentionally killed, but mostly for himself. Dominicus brought down the gavel with all his might on top of Carl's skull. His head disintegrated in a spray of blood and gore while his collarbone collapsed in on itself. It sounded like somebody smashing a pumpkin. The crimson mixture of blood and brain matter sprayed out in all directions like a Maccabee tie-dye on the white snow. The elves cheered as they were showered in Carl's blood. They stuck out their tongues to catch the spray like children catching snowflakes. Carl's body continued to collapse under the weight of the blow. The elves wasted no time cleaning up the mess they'd made. It was their favorite part of the job, after all. They walked over to what remained of Carl and collected what parts they could find. They made their way back to the trailer, sneaking a nibble or two along the way. Climbing the stairs to the porch, they tossed the carcass into the living room floor with, like, a bag of trash. Another infomercial was playing during the commercial break. Dominicus made his way up to the porch. The wooden stairs nearly gave out under the weight of his gigantic body. He bit off the end of a large cigar, then with a snap of his finger lit the tip, admiring his work. He walked up to the door with his gavel resting on his shoulder. Cigar smoke billowed around his head like a halo. Peering in at Carl, one last time he paused. A song on the television caught his attention. Here comes Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus Lane. The upbeat Christmas tune celebrating his brother spilled from the TV speakers. Dominicus flashed a look of disgust. I fucking hate that song, he jeered, flicking the lit cigar onto the carpet. With a wave of his hand, the floor lit up like the 4th of July. Flames climbed up the curtains, spread to the ceiling, and swallowed the recliner. Carl's body was engulfed in violent fire. Within minutes, the rest of the trailer was ablaze, lighting up the trailer park. The elves applauded from the lawn as they watched the roof slowly collapsing in on itself. Dominicus set down his gavel, clapped his massive hands, smiling. In a way, he looked almost jolly. The fire reflected in his dark eyes, making them twinkle. Let's go, boys, he called to the elves. They scrambled up onto the porch one by one, and without hesitation, their bells jingling merrily, they jumped into the blaze. Dominicus Klaus, the bringer of Christmas judgment, took one last look around. He removed the naughty list and a quill pen from his breast pocket. Dipping the quill into the blood coating the head of his gavel, he scratched out the name, Carl Edmund Scottsdale, before returning the items to his pocket. Finally, he followed the elves into the fire, where the 4 of them vanished without a trace. Their work was complete. Justice was done. That is, until next Christmas. A bit of a longer one, but a really good one. The visuals in that one are so good. I've already read that one because so anyway. Whew. Anyways, yeah, so those are my horror Christmas stories. Yeah, and I think this will come out. Yeah, this will come out like right before. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Have a fantastic weekend, whatever you decide to do with it. And I'll see you in the next one for my top 10 horror movies of the year because I was indecisive and couldn't get it down to 5. See you guys in the next one.